And today we are very privileged to have with us Professor Jeremy Monteiro to share a little bit about his experience, his journey as a musician, as a professional. He's dubbed as Singapore's King of Swing. Cultural Medallion recipient Jeremy Monteiro Professor Jeremy Monteiro has garnered critical acclaim all over the world, having performed and recorded with the likes of James Moody, Michael Brecker, Bobby McFerrin, Lee Ritenour, Herbie Mann, Paulino da Costa, Ernie Watts, Charlie Hayden, just to name a few, okay? And having performed all over the world, in 2014, November 2014, Professor Jeremy performed on one of the stages of the EFG London Jazz Festival at the Queen Elizabeth Hall and at the famed Ronnie Scott's Jazz Club. And having, in November 2015, he returned to the EFG London Jazz Festival to play at the Royal Albert Hall's Alga Room with his group Jeremy Monteiro and Alberto Marsico with the Jazz Blues Brothers, which has an album on the label most associated with the recordings of Ella Fitzgerald, the iconic Verve record label. And Prof. Jeremy is the only Southeast Asian jazz musician to have had an album released on the Verve label. He has served as International Arts Ambassador for EFG Bank since 2012. And in addition, he has been a Fellow of the London College of Music and the Royal Society for the Encouragement of Arts, Manufactures and Commerce in the UK, and was appointed a visiting professor of the University of West London in 2016. And Prof. Jeremy is also a founder of the Composers and Authors Society of Singapore Limited, or COMPAS, an organization responsible for the protection of music copyrights in Singapore, and serves as a member of the board of directors and chairman of its licensing committee. He marked his 40th anniversary as a professional musician in September 2016 with a concert which included international and local guest artists such as Lee Ritenour, Ernie Watts, Carmen Bradford, and Singaporean jazz singer Jacinta Abisheganaden and Melissa Tham. He's also released several albums in the past 2 years, including Brazilian Dreams, Montage, with a little help from my friends, and most recently, Remembering Teresa, and Yesterday Once More in 2018. And in 2016, together with a few jazz supporter friends, he established the Jazz Association Singapore to bring jazz to people in all parts of Singapore and help raise its level of excellence, especially in the area of youth development, and work towards making Singapore a leading jazz city of the world. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Jeremy Monteiro.
Hi everyone. Thank you for your kind welcome, and thank you, Ashif, for the introduction. Actually, when I listen to all the things that you say I'm doing, I suddenly feel very tired already. Also because of this haze. So I think, thank you so much for making it out. I thought that today, if you don't mind, I would like to talk about 3 main points, and then after that, perhaps I can take your questions. I'm not so much of a public speaker. In fact, I think I've only done about 3 or 4 public speaking engagements. Most of the time, I like to put my thoughts down in writing. I've released a book called Late Night Thoughts of a Jazz Musician, which is published by Marshall Cavendish and available at the library over here, I believe. And also on my Facebook posts, I like to share my thoughts also on Facebook. So I thought I will speak broadly on 3 main things. One is a little bit of a biography of my life, how I started and how I got into music, and my process of learning music and becoming a musician. and also the various things that I have done in the last few years. And maybe the second part, I'll talk a little bit about my process as a musician, how I practice, how I compose, what are my habits that I do when I compose or when I'm preparing for a concert, or just basically musical preparation. The last part, I guess, of what I want to talk about is starting out the Jazz Association of Singapore, how it began, how the idea started, and how now we have, in just 3 short years, become a charity, a Singapore registered charity, and also what is known as an institution of a public character, which allows us to give our donors a tax break of 250% for the donations to the organization. So I started off actually in my home in Singapore. My father and mother both love music. My father used to be a policeman back in the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s, and in the 60s he used to be, at that time they called the Harbour Board policeman, and now I think it's PSA police, but he used to play Hawaiian guitar. He loved to play Hawaiian guitar and jazz guitar as well. And his friends used to come over and have jam sessions in our home. So there was music in the house all the time. And then my mom used to play the piano, a very good classical piano player. So she used to practice very regularly. And then my grandfather, who lived, my father's father used to live in the house, and he used to love to sing and play the piano as well. So I grew up with music around me all the time. It was really very, it was quite a happy home, and the music is one of the main components that made it a happy home. So basically, my parents bought me those little China-made toy pianos. I don't know if any of you can still remember it. So I used to bang on it all the time. So my father's jam session group, my father went to buy a Fafisa organ. I don't know, some of you remember there was an organ called a Fafisa organ. And it's quite a horrible sounding instrument. You hear it in some of the earlier rock records, and it's a very cheesy sound. So one day when they were having a jam session, I was about 5 years old. I somehow climbed on the stool at the organ, and I started to play a little piece with both hands, you know. So then, I never had any piano lessons, and basically my father and his friends stopped talking and suddenly looked at me, and I was just playing on the organ. So one of my father's friends, my father's nickname was Monty. He said, "Monty, you better sell this organ and buy a piano and get your son some piano lessons." And he actually did that. He sold the organ very quickly, and he bought a very cheap China-made piano. The brand was called Blessing. And indeed, it was a blessing for me because I was able to start taking lessons. I remember I was about 6.5, and my first music teacher was a lady by the name of Miss Quack, and she was a very patient teacher, and she used to actually show me all the rudiments and fundamentals, which I think are very important. No matter what genre you want to end up playing later on, it was very useful for me to learn how to play the fundamentals. And I learned my Mozart and my Chopin and my scales and my Hanon. And the Hanon that I started practicing back when I was 6 years old, in 1966, believe it or not, when I practice every day, I will still practice my Hanon before I start practicing. I'll talk about my practice regime later, but can you imagine that something that you learn that's useful, that has been with me all this time, all 53 years that I've been playing the piano. Okay, so later on, about 3 years later, in 1969, my father by that time had left the police force, Harbourburg Police Force, and he joined Mobil Oil as a sales executive. And because he had the gift of the gab, I think I inherited it from him, he was able to do very well in sales, and he rose up Mobil Oil very fast. And the next thing you know, just a few years later, he was offered a job as the managing director of Borneo Skyways, an air charter company based in Kota Kinabalu in Sabah. So the whole family moved to Sabah in 1969 in Kota Kinabalu. I'm going to share a story with you because my father was the managing director, but they had just hired a German chief engineer for chief aviation engineer. And one day we were staying in this area called Likas Park, very similar in character to like Serangoon Gardens or something like that. And my father and mother invited this chief engineer, his name was Dirk Buffont, to come over for dinner. And he came over for dinner, and we were staying in a decent house, a 2,000 square foot semi-detached house. And when Dirk Buffon sat down, he said, "Oh, Mr. Monteiro, this is not fair." So he says, why is not fair? Because you are the managing director and you are staying in this semi-detached house. I am only the chief engineer, and they've given me a huge mansion to live in by the sea in Tanjung Aru in Kota Kinabalu. So I do not feel comfortable. So I would like for us to switch houses so that you, the boss, can stay in the large house by the ocean. And this, I never forgot this because this made me really respect the German people, because their sense of fair play, that, you know, just because I'm white, right? So what? They gave me this big job, but you are the boss. So we actually moved into this very beautiful home on Likas Park. Those of you who visit at Tanjung Aru, those of you who visited Kota Kinabalu may know the Tanjung Aru Shangri-La Hotel. So it's very near from there. And the garden was very big, about the size of 1.5 football fields, and a huge house by 5 minutes walk from the ocean. And it was a wonderful home. I mean, just to experience that kind of living. And I still remember, don't ask me how I remember these things, right? I'm already almost 60 years old, but for some reason, these things are all crystal clear in my head. The rental for that large house, the living area was about 6,000 square feet. Garden the size of 1.5 football fields by the ocean. The rental was 600 ringgit at the time. Yeah. So I remember that at that point, the music lessons were getting a little bit tough, and I started to get really bored of my piano lessons. And I really didn't enjoy my piano lessons. I was starting to really, I would use the word hate my piano lessons. So then my mother was a bit worried, why is it like that, you know? And there's a story that I want to share that I think that it shows you how much I hated the music and how I'm so thankful that things have changed, how things changed, where I was learning to press the sustain pedal on the piano, right? And so I was so upset with having to practice. I went outside to my father had a small mini motorcycle, a Honda mini motorcycle. I started the engine until the engine was burning hot, you know. And when the engine was very hot, I deliberately took my leg and I burned my leg against the engine. And I screamed and I came limping back to the house and said, Mommy, I burned my leg. I cannot practice the piano. And my mother says, "You silly boy, why did you do that? You know, come on here." And then, you know, old wives' tales that some of you may remember, they take butter, you know, the butter and put it on the burn wound, you know, and put the butter and say, "Are you okay now? You feeling good? It's less pain?" Yes, it's less pain, you know. So I thought she would say, "Okay, you can go and play in your room now." She says, "Okay, now you can go and practice the piano, but you don't have to press the pedal." So my plan backfired. So still, it was still not something I wanted to do. Then all of a sudden, my mom had heard about a piano teacher who actually is one of the first master's degree piano performance majors in Southeast Asia, and he lived there in Kota Kinabalu. His name is Mr. Tan Zi Tong, and so she managed to engage him to teach me, and I went to my lesson with Mr. Tan, and at first I was quite begrudging. Then when he played the piano, he played so beautifully, and that really turned things around for me. But what really made me fall in love with music and want to learn music again was that he could play everything he was talking about. There's a very cruel thing they say about teachers, say those who know do, those who don't teach, right? But in this case, he was one of those teachers, just like there are many teachers like this in Singapore now. I'm very, very thankful for it, that what they are teaching, they can actually do. And I think this is a very important thing. So everything he was trying to teach me, whether it's phrasing or whether it's, feel, emotion, and he even told me how I must open my heart and my head out to inspiration. He said, if you believe in God, then you try to connect with the divine. But if you don't believe in God, also it's okay. You open your heart and your head out to humanity, to nature, and when you do this, it can come into your playing. Then he will show me, he will play something, sound perfectly okay to me, and say, now I'm going to open myself to think about the beauty of nature and so on. I'm going to play this same part for you, and then it would sound so beautiful, and I could feel his connection to something greater than just the notes. And I think this is the very important thing for me when I started to learn from Mr. Tan Zi Tong. I am still in touch with Mr. Tan Zi Tong. I still call him on every birthday, and he still calls me on every birthday. And when I did my 40th anniversary show a few years ago at the Esplanade, he came and attended, and I was very happy to have him in the audience. So a good teacher is very important. And so I later on, my father, I had a wonderful life. My father had bought a few racing ponies. In Sabah they don't race racehorses, they race ponies. And during the season, when there was no racing season, they would bring the ponies and put it in our garden. And I had ponies in my garden. I remember one pony's name was White Bullet, my favorite pony. And I didn't ride, I was afraid to ride, and I used to. Another story I will tell you before I leave my Sabah childhood home is that I used to take my father's motorcycle and ride, and the garden was like so big, I told you, 1.5 football fields, but they will only cut the grass for around 1/3 of it, and the rest is mostly lalang and that kind of stuff. And one day I rode my motorbike and went to the edge of the cut grass, and all of a sudden this cobra came up, I was so shocked, and instead of riding my motorbike back, I threw the bike on the floor and ran back to the house shouting, "Snake, snake, snake." Quite silly, right? Can just ride back faster with a bike. So anyway, my father was then, after 3.5 years there, moved back to Singapore. And I continued my piano lessons. And at this point, they couldn't really stop me practicing already, because I had fallen in love with music again. And I was totally self-driven. And I used to love sitting on the piano and practicing, even back at that age. I was about 11 years old. So I finished my PSLE, then I went on to St. Joseph's Institution. First 2 years were quite good. I had a very good teacher who inspired me to work hard. I wasn't a very good student in school, but he inspired me so well, right, that I actually did so well in secondary too. Like one of the worst students, I actually managed to do so well that I got into the best science class in Sec 3. And it was all due again to this wonderful teacher who drove me to realize my potential. When I got to Sec 3, I was in Sec 3 Science 7 in SJI, I was the worst student in the best class in the school, which is horrible. It's better to be the best student in the worst class, because I was the one pulling down the average percentage for the whole school. And of course, the rest of the classmates were not at all amused by me, because I was always holding them back. But there were 5 or 6 who were very kind to me. They understood that I, by that time, was very serious about my music, spending more time with my music. And they knew that I was not going to excel, but I was maybe one day going to be a good musician. So I still keep in touch with these 5 or 6 students who didn't make me feel bad. There's a saying, it doesn't matter, by the great American poet, author, Maya Angelou, it doesn't matter what you do. People will not remember what you do. People will not remember what you say. People will only remember how you made them feel, right? So I think that it's very important. Why I remember these 5 or 6 friends of mine is they never made me feel small, even though I was such a irritating person, not studying hard enough, pulling down the grades. I went on. I was in the school band for a while, and then I went on. My father and mother encouraged me all this way, And my mother, in particularly, she encouraged me all the way. But my father, when I was about 15 years old, I told my parents I want to become a professional musician. And it's as though there was lightning inside the house, right? Because they feel that it's a very difficult profession and it's something. My mother continued to encourage me, but my father suddenly, he even threatened to stop my piano lessons, and he wanted me to concentrate on my studies and so on. So he, for a while, he was was discouraging me, and I can understand why totally now, why he was afraid for me to become a professional musician. In fact, I could have done better in secondary school, but then he promised to send me to the best schools, but I don't want to study anymore, you see. I wanted to be a musician. So when I finished my Sec 4 at the 1976, I almost immediately had an offer to play solo piano and organ at a place called the Country Club Hotel in East Coast Road. Anybody can remember? Yeah. There's Mr. P.C. Tan was the owner. So every evening I would play there for happy hours, solo piano and solo organ from about 5:30 to 7:30. And because I was underage, and that time you cannot work in the bar as a musician below the age of 17, unless you're accompanied by an adult. So my mother would force my father to send me every day and sit down. But he didn't mind, just sat down by the bar and drink beer. And also because that place after happy hour became a little bit dodgy, So all the ladies of the night would show up. So my mother wanted my father to bring me home straight away after happy hours. But the following year, in 1977, I was very lucky because my mom was a nurse and she was doing private nursing at the time. And it so happened that there was this gentleman by the name of Mr. A.J. Isaac, who he and his wife own Club 392, Hilda's Boutique, and so on and so forth. And actually, when he was recovering from his heart bypass, at that time, bypass not so simple like nowadays. A recovery period was much longer, and you need a private nurse to look after you or stay in hospital for a long period, not like nowadays. You can go home after a couple of days, I think. And this Mr. Isaac asked my mom about the family, got to know my mother, and said, oh, my son wants to be a professional musician. He's now playing solo piano. He says, okay, when I get better, you ask your son to come and audition for the band that I have at Club 392, the jazz band. And if he can do the job, maybe he can come once in a while and play once a week for us or something. So when he was better, I went down to Club 392 for audition with a 4-piece band. I mean, the band was already there. The pianist had left, that's why they needed a new pianist. And not only did Mr. Isaac hire me as the pianist for the Club 392 band, he made me the band leader. At age of 16 and a half, I was the band leader of a band in a restaurant in a jazz bar, and all my musicians were in their 30s and their 40s. And so musically, maybe I was up to it, but it's not easy for a 16-and-a-half-year-old boy to be the boss of professional musicians. Most of them, they respected me and they got along with me. Although there was one musician who was giving me a hard time, and one time when I told him not to come to work late, he waited for me behind Orchard Towers and wanted to hammer me, you know. Lucky my drummer saw from afar and came running and said, "What are you doing?" You know, he's at that, believe it or not, that time I'm very small size. And said, please pick on someone your own size, you know, he's right to ask you to come to work on time. So that was my first job. And while I was at Club 392, my guitarist left to join the SPC orchestra. And so there was a guitarist who was the music director of EMI Records, working with Reggie Verghese, who was the executive producer. And he wanted to buy this new expensive guitar. He didn't need a job playing in a jazz club, but he said to can I come and play in your band for a few months? I want to earn the money and buy a new guitar, new expensive guitar. So I said, yeah, I would love to have you. And after we worked for 2 months, 3 months, he said, Jeremy, do you want to come and try to play on some of this session piano for some of these artists? I said, I can give it a try. I've never done it before. I can give it a try. So I went, and the first group I worked with and recorded with, although the album didn't come out first, but the first recording I ever did in my life, professional recording, was with Matthew and the Mandarins. Right. So, and then after that, I recorded an album with Francis Yip, and she was also wonderful to work with, very patient with me, and I got to play from during the 70s all through the 80s and the early 90s. I played on more than 300 pop albums. And I remember there was a singer's manager who called. Singer's name was Wu Kang. Anybody remember Wu Kang? No? He used to sing in the old style of singing Chinese songs, you know. I think some of you may remember the style he used to sing. 我不要恨，我不要爱, like that style of singing. Anyway, so don't clap for me. I'm just imitating him. Anyway, so his manager called me and said, Jeremy, I heard you're doing a lot of work with EMI Records, and can you write arrangements for a 30-piece orchestra? And I had never written anything for more than a 4-piece band, you know. Then I was holding the phone. I said, Ken, how long do I have? So he said, about 6 to 9 months before we do the recording. I said, okay, Ken, give me the details and, we will do it. I put on the phone and said, oh my goodness, how do I write for a 30-piece orchestra? And I called up my Uncle John Lee, who at that time was the arranger at the SBC orchestra. I said, Uncle John, I need to take arrangement lessons from you. And I went to his house. He was very patient. He taught me very fast. And I'm a fast learner, so I actually learned how to write for a pop orchestra. And 9 months later, there we were in the studio recording with strings. I can still remember the violin player's name was Willie Ong Kopo, and with Tony Z on the drums, and Patrick Seed on the bass, and Martin Pereira on the guitar, and we recorded Wu Kang's album. So I went on to actually record many albums, both as an arranger and producer. In 1978, before I went into the army, I was asked by the late great Malay producer, composer by the name of Kasim Masdor to do the arrangement and also be the ghost producer for Rahimah Rahim's 1978 album. A ghost producer means you are the producer, but they don't put your name there as a producer. You are just a ghost. No, but at least he allowed me, because sometimes these big name producers, they won't even give you any other credit. At least he allowed my name to be arranger and music director on the album. And I produced that album and with Rahimah Rahim. And Rahimah Rahim is still active in the music scene today. So Then I went into the army. Can you imagine, after having a career already, I already was playing all over town and playing with Francis Yip and Anita Sarawak and lots of great Matthew. Matthew and the Mandarins. And suddenly, I'm in the army, and it was a bit of a shock to the system. I didn't do too badly. I was a second-class marksman. And then I went on to, this is a funny story. So basically, I went in and I did my basic military training, and I was supposed to go straight into the music and drama company at that time, right? So logical, isn't it? I mean, already a professional musician. But at that time, you believe it or not, no computer, they lost my file. Yeah, so they lost my file, so I said, oh, we don't know where to send you. I said, sir, I'm supposed to go music and drama. No, nonsense. I don't see in this small file. I don't see anything about. So then they look at my name, Monteiro. Then my Professor Ernest Monteiro was the head of medicine at the University of Singapore. Even Dr. Mahathir studied under he was a cousin, but I used to call him uncle because of the age difference. Studied medicine from him. And then I saw another one, Dr. Edward Monteiro, is the head of communicable diseases. And at that time, early research in AIDS, he was heading up in Singapore. And then a lot of nurses, my auntie, my mother, all Monteiro. Okay, you go to School of Military Medicine. So I went to the School of Military Medicine, and it was shocking for me because I'm so scared of blood, right? So the first time I saw blood, I fainted. No need to have passing out parade, I passed out already. So I got to quite enjoy study pharmacology, first aid medicine, and so on and so forth, first aid and emergency medicine, and of course I passed out as a medic. Not just passed out, but passed out as a medic. After that, after 6 months, and I got my Geneva Convention card, very serious, and also the right to wear a cross on my helmet, which basically is X marks the spot for the enemy. Okay. So after that, I went to SR, one of the infantry units, and then they found my file. And 1 week later, they said, "Oh, you're meant to be in the music and drama company." I said, "I know." So you ask yourself why they have to go through. I asked myself why they have to go through this, training was not very easy. And I actually went to the music and drama company. I had a motorcycle. I went to work one day. The first day of work, I'm not kidding you, I'm riding my motorcycle back home, and there's a big traffic jam outside the old MINDEF. Now it's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So I took my bike and I weaved, and I saw this guy had been hit by a car and on the road and just bleeding profusely all over the road. So I stopped an army car, I took the first aid kit, and I stopped his bleeding and I patched him up, asked someone to call an ambulance. And then a colonel doctor, that time colonel also have driver in the army, nowadays colonel is no driver, came out and says, "Yes, private, everything okay? Yeah, you got everything under control. You call ambulance ready?" I said, "Yes." He walked off. So then, this guy ended up, but he was a dancer in the music and drama company. After that, a few days, he came back to work. And from then on, he was so nice to me every time. "Jeremy, you want coffee? Jeremy, you want cake? I buy for you cake." So it was very nice to me the whole time in the music and drama company. And we actually, music and drama company was a great place for me because I learned how to write big band arrangements, And this was very good for me. And I got good very fast, not because I was hardworking, because if I make more than 3 mistakes in one big band arrangement, my officer in charge will give me weekend guard duty. So I cannot see my girlfriend, right? So I'll make sure I make very little mistakes. And that's how I started writing for big band. And I went on to, after I left, when I left the army, I started writing jingles. You know what jingles are, right? Advertising music. And I wrote a lot of campaign songs, a national courtesy song, national productivity song. I also was asked to be the music director and the producer for the first of the four national songs, Stand Up for Singapore, We Are Singapore, Count on Me Singapore. And after that, I composed the fourth one. You know, people always mistake the national songs for National Day songs. So in Singapore, actually, we have our national anthem, and we have four national songs. Our national songs are Stand Up for Singapore, We Are Singapore, Count on Me Singapore, and One People, One Nation, One Singapore. Then the others are National Day songs. But in my opinion, some of the National Day songs are so fantastic that they should be recognized as national songs. And one of them is Dick Lee's Home, right? Beautiful song. And I think we should formalize this, actually. We have our national songs, and every time someone writes a song that moves the whole country, we should elevate the song from just a National Day song to a national song. Just America has this as a national anthem, and then they have the national songs, America the Beautiful, and all this kind of thing. So I did that kind of work, and I wrote and produced or composed 700 such pieces of music from 1981 to 1991. And it was just that part of my life that I did it. I remember that I wrote the National Productivity Song on a deck chair on the beach in Desaru. If the National Productivity Board finds out, I think they ask for the money back. But it made people productive anyway. And I found it very intriguing to have this ability to not just write a pretty piece of music, but to write a piece of music that can help to deliver a message and to touch people's heart and to touch people's mind, for them to feel, for example, pride for the country. And I was, until the time that the late first Prime Minister, Lee Kuan Yew, if you watch him at every National Day parade, he could sing national anthem, and he could sing Stand Up for Singapore. You could see he knew the words. Yeah. So I did that for 10 years, but then I found that I was more interested in playing jazz than doing this kind of work, right? So in 1988, I was very lucky. Actually, I think I'm very lucky because some of the things that have happened to me, I just can't imagine. For example, one day, the founder and the director of the Montreux Jazz Festival, the most widely known jazz festival in the world, happened to go to a restaurant in Cuppage Terrace, and the owner happened to be playing a cassette tape of my first album with my band Jeremy and some American musicians. And he was eating, and he goes, "Who is this pianist you're playing? It sounds so good." And the bass player and drummer, I recognize their style of playing from many years ago. He said, "Oh, this is Jeremy Monteiro." And on this album, he has two great Chicago musicians, L.D. Young and Red Holt. And then the Montreux Jazz Festival director told the owner of the restaurant, his name was Fabrice Dibasi. He said, "You know, Fabrice, if you can tell Jeremy to bring L.D. Young and Red Holt to Montreux, I will put them on the main stage of the Montreux Jazz Festival." And I mean, what are the chances, right? And really, seriously. And so I called L.D. and Red, and we went with two other great musicians, and we played on the main stage, the Montreux Jazz Festival. And the program, our concert was televised across Europe, and also one of the items from our concert was featured in the Laserdisc that was distributed worldwide with Josh Benson, Spyro Gyra, and other great musicians. So all of a sudden, although I didn't become a star overnight, all of a sudden I was not a stranger to the scene, right? And this allowed me to build upon this career. And since then, I've been blessed to continue to have one fantastic experience after another, producing albums. Last year, I was asked to produce the latest album by Laura Fiji. And not only did she ask me to produce her album, she asked me to produce her vocals. And I'm not really a great singer, but for some reason I said, why do you want me to produce your vocals? Because I've heard how you produce other vocalists' albums, and I would like you to direct me on the album. So I got a chance to produce her vocals. So that is pretty much my career since then, and I'm thankful that I've been recognized by by many people, government, and even my peers. One thing I'm most grateful about is that when I have a concert nowadays, people come and fill out my concerts, buy all the tickets, and I don't take this for granted, because it's such a blessing to be able to play music and have people. And also, like, I mean, I'm not even a good speaker. I don't think I'm a good speaker at all. But all of you, have so many wonderful things to do. Choose to come and be here with me. So thank you very much. Thank you. So briefly, I want to talk about my process as how do I practice and how do I compose. And now I apply this to also my writing. I'm also involved in watch creation. So this is one of the watches that my partner and I created. My factory is in Germany. And if you go to jmonteirowatch.com, you can go and see. I don't do this really, and I don't make a lot of money from it, but at least I don't lose money, and I love doing this, very much, And how I got to do this, a few years ago, I worked with this Italian musician. He's based in Thailand. He's very famous for writing the music for Thai horror movies. One of the princess, the royal princess, she actually is a great director and producer of these horror movies. So my friend, he writes a lot of this. So I was working on another project with him, and I was in the studio in his house, and he said, this is about 6-7 years ago, so he said, let's take a break and go down and have some coffee. So we went downstairs. His studio is in his house, and as we're having coffee, he took out a blueprint of a kitchen cabinet. And he started drawing on the blueprint. So I said, what are you doing? He says, oh, I also do interior design, so this is a blueprint that I'm drawing for someone's kitchen cabinet. So in the evening, he said, Jeremy, let's go and eat at my Italian restaurant, 10 minutes walk away, just follow me. And we went there, and then he said, let me make the starter, the starter, and then I'll ask my chefs to make the rest of the meal. And I was so impressed. So when we got back, I said, Bruno, his name is Bruno Brugnano. I said, Bruno, how come you do music so well, and you can do interior design so well, and you can cook, and you design your restaurant, and you build your pizza oven. How come you can shift around? He says creative energy is creative energy, right? How it manifests is up to you. So, for example, stem cells, right? They don't know whether they're liver cells or lung cells or whatever. But if, let's say, you have some problem, some people have a problem in the lung, some of them, they can actually take these stem cells who don't know what cells they are. They haven't actually become any kind of cells, and put it in the lung and actually suddenly become lung cells, and your lung regenerates in growth. So, in this way, he said creative energy is the same thing. If you have creative energy, it's up to you to channel it, whether it's in music or creative writing, or whether it's marketing strategy, not just arts, or anything. So it's up to you to just recognize your creative energy and channel it accordingly, and don't tell yourself, I'm a musician, and then just restrict yourself from being any kind of other creative person. Allow your creative energy to go into anything. So that's one thing I wanted to share. The other thing is that when I practice, I have a regime. I know people who practice for 4 hours and never improve because they don't have a plan. You must have a practice plan. So, for example, I will start off to center myself. I will start off playing a slow ballad. Can be anything. Can be Danny Boy, can be a Duke Ellington ballad. And this allows me to center myself. After that, I will practice my Hanon. Remember, I told you I learned to play Hanon when I was 6 years old, right? I will practice my Hanon. I will practice Jenny. Jenny is famous for writing etudes. I practice my major scales. I'll practice, my arpeggios, my chromatic scales, and this will be about half an hour, sometimes 40 minutes. And then I will take the pieces that I'm preparing to play for a concert, and I will start working on those pieces for an hour, something like that. Now, after this, I will actually have a section of my practice which I call fighting with my demons. What is this? These are the things that I don't practice because I find it difficult or too difficult or I don't like. If I don't like. And when I ask myself honestly why I don't like, it's because I don't know how to do. And as a result, I will, for example, I used to not feel comfortable playing in odd time. Easy to play 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Easy to play waltz, 1, 2, 3. But to play in 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or play in 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, is very difficult. And so I spent, for example, nearly 2 years learning to play in 7 very comfortably, the same way I can play in 4/4. And so as a musician, in other words, it's forcing myself to get out of my comfort zone. Because you cannot grow within your comfort zone. You can only grow when you are feeling uncomfortable. So I will force myself to do that. So during my practice period, I will spend at least 15 minutes or so. Now after that, I would, then it's random what I want to do. But that I have a practice plan. So that's my practice plan. Now, when I want to sit to write, compose, or to write, as I write my essays, I find that I have to be very quiet. I have to learn to still my mind. And this is the problem that as creative people, that we do not find enough time to be quiet. Because we are always occupying our mind with whether it's our devices or just non-stop chatter of the TV, and we don't allow our minds to be still, right? And to me, stillness is stillness and quietude are the wellspring of creativity. From all quietness in your mind is where you can hear. I don't mean to be religious here. This is just to talk about the spirituality part of being a musician, an artist. I think silence is the voice of God. And if you are silent, you hear whatever you conceive God to be. You hear the inspiration, and you will be able to allow your creativity to flow. Sometimes you go into a room to compose, and you still your mind, is very quiet, and you invite inspiration to enter the room. Sometimes inspiration will come. Sometimes inspiration refuses to show up. It's okay. Don't be impatient. Every 3 or 4 times, you'll find that inspiration will start showing up more and more often. And after a while, inspiration will show up. Every time you honor it by silencing your mind and your heart. And this is how you are able to create, whether it's works of art or music or an essay or a poem, because I think we need this. I think the mark of a successful life is being able to have balance between motion and stillness. Motion because we must do things, right? So if we don't do things, I mean, some people are always thinking, always quiet, never do anything, so no use, right? So some people always all over the place, bouncing off walls, completely being distracted by the world all the time. And so even no matter how much of a gift you may have in the arts, you will never be able to create works of art. You will never be able to create pieces of music without the ability to be still, to be quiet. So this is my biggest advice I give to anybody, young people especially, who want to write music or write books, is to train yourself. Sometimes you can practice, you learn to do meditation. That's one way you learn. But there are many ways, and I encourage you to go and find your own personal way of quietening your mind. Okay, and that's my process as a composer and as a musician. I think the other thing that to remember is that in music, the worst thing you can do is to be in competition with other people. That's why I don't really like. I've been asked to judge many of these music competitions. Sometimes I force myself. Sometimes they offer me so much money, I have to say yes. But I don't like it. I honestly don't like it because I believe that the arts shouldn't be something that's you compete. And I think that the only person you have to be in competition with in the arts or music is yourself. The only thing you need to do is to try to be the best artist or musician that you can be. That you can be. Don't try to be. Don't be jealous and don't look at other people who are better than you as inspiration. One of the reasons why I'm able to mentor a lot of young musicians is because I'm not scared. You see? Even though some of them, I'll be very honest with you, they call me king of swing and all that, but I can tell you in Singapore there are at least 4 or 5 jazz pianists who are younger than me who can play much better than me. I'm not kidding. Okay, maybe the why they have not become successful yet is because they don't know how to connect with the audience, and this is the other part that's very important, that you need to connect with your audience, either musically, and make them feel your heart. I think no matter how good you are, if you don't know how to let your audience feel your heart, because why it's so important as a musician to play in such a way, right, that people can feel your heart, is because in the center of your heart and in the center of my heart, we are the same, right? And so if people can feel that, then they like to come to watch you play because they can feel you and they can feel at peace, right? They can feel love. So this is very important. But don't compete with anybody other than yourself. And if you're another student in your class is doing better, congratulate him or her, and then tell yourself, okay, now what do I need to do to get to be better? Because you can only be as good as this. We are all masters of our own level. We are all, as an artist or musician or whatever we do, we are a master of our own level. Nothing more, nothing less. And we cannot be any more in this moment than this. If we work hard, we can go to this next level. But no matter what level we reach, there are always people who may not be as good as you, and there will be hundreds, if not thousands of people who are much better than you. So why be frustrated, right? Just worry about yourself. Yes, listen to other people for inspiration, see how good they are, and so on. The last thing I'd like to touch on, before I hand it over to all of you to ask questions, if any, is when I started the Jazz Association of Singapore and what I'm trying to do with it. About 8 years ago, I went to visit the former, maybe 10 years ago, the former Senior Minister, Professor S. Jayakumar. And I told him I wanted to start a Singapore Jazz Orchestra. I said, but when I went to sit down, the first thing he said, please, don't come to me if you're asking me to set up another elite orchestra. I have an SSO, I have the SCO, and now, all the communities, the Malay community, Indian community, they all would like to have an orchestra. So I assured him, no, I'm not coming here to start an elite orchestra. I believe that jazz, we will play for Singaporeans across the whole of Singapore with all walks of life. And we will also play the more difficult repertoire for the real jazz aficionados. And from telling me, don't come and ask me for a lead orchestra, within 15 minutes he said, okay, I will be your patron. Because I satisfied him that I was not going to do that. So I tried to raise the funds, but I was not successful. This is 8 or 10 years ago. And I felt that if I couldn't do it properly, better don't do. So I said, never mind, I put this idea aside. Then about 4 years ago, I thought to myself, maybe instead of just starting the orchestra, why don't I start an organization that can help to educate Singaporeans and youth on what is jazz and how jazz can be so much fun and how they can enjoy it and have public talks. So I said, maybe I will, with my friends and we said we will form an association to lift the level of excellence of jazz in Singapore and to bring jazz to all walks of life, people of all walks of life. 2 is to be involved in youth development, because so many young musicians are interested in jazz, and some of them are quite talented and can be very good. So I wanted this organization to be involved in youth development. And then 3, I felt that I wanted to bring Singapore jazz to the world, right? I wanted to do cultural diplomacy. Then after we started about a year and a half ago, I also wanted to work with inclusivity. And so we've forged a partnership with Very Special Arts, and we work with children with autism and also Down syndrome, and we've actually done musical performances with them. So these are the 4 main pillars of the Jazz Association. I've been very lucky because I've got the support of a few friends who came together to form the board of directors. Professor Tommy Koh is our patron, and we get good funding from the government. We have good donations from the public who support us. If you want to know more about the Jazz Association, just go to jazzassociation.sg. Okay, so there are many performances coming up in our calendar. So please come and watch both the main orchestra and the youth orchestra. The youth orchestra is amazing. Most countries, right, a youth orchestra will be around 50% of the level of the main orchestra, 40 or 50%. Our Jazz Association Youth Orchestra operates at 80% the level of the main orchestra. And that means the adults got to buck up, right? And work harder because the kids are doing so well and they're sounding so good. And right now this is half my bandwidth, running the Jazz Association and the 2 orchestras. The other half of my bandwidth is I still have an active performing career, traveling all over the world and running my other companies, Showtime Productions, which does show production and album production, and also my watch company. And that's how I live my life. And then when he described all those things, I think, why I work so hard? But I love it. I think you cannot be a workaholic if you love your work. I think you can't. But I try to do other things, like, because you get nagging, why didn't we go for holiday or that. So I do try my best to have other interests and spend time with my friends, family, traveling, seeing the world. I love it very much. And I can tell you something, as someone who's traveled all over the world, there's no better place than Singapore. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Jeremy. Well, you see why he's sitting there? He can really connect, right? I think, yeah, I really enjoyed your talk. Thank you very much. So now the floor is open to everybody here. Who has a question, please raise your hand. Okay. And then I'll come to you, I'll pass the mic, and then you stand up to say your question, your comments, okay? I'll start with this gentleman at the front.
Good evening, Jeremy. Hi, my name is Ian. 2013, okay, the question, I'm going to compress it right. As a young person who's focused into jazz, now I had this, when I was a young man growing up, I had this prejudice, right? I was focused like only on Malmsteen, Steve Vai, shredding, and neoclassical. Something happened along me in 2013. I mean, you were there somewhere when Girls' Generation came down, 2014. So something happened to me and I broke my prejudice. And after that, I went to fusion, and along the way, I realized I can play all kinds of music. Now, as a young man, right, and do you have any episodes of being prejudiced, or should I say tunnel vision, just say, like, I only do jazz alone? And how, if you do have that prejudice or tunnel vision, right, how do you get out of it? How do you expand to play music for the musicians? Or should I say you just play music, but you can just play anything? Thank you.
This is a very good question. I think that although I'm known as a jazz musician, I have got about 45. In fact, I'm releasing my 45th album next weekend at the Esplanade. It's called Overjoyed. It's a jazz tribute to the music of Stevie Wonder. It's already available on iTunes, but the CDs will be out next week. Although I have 45 pop jazz albums, I've played on more than 300 pop albums. And I also have won an award for a classical piece of music I composed from the International Radio Festival of New York. So my answer to your question is this. At first I would think this way, people say this to me all the time. There's only good music or bad music. It's music, it's all music. But now I don't even say that because I think it's very snobbish to say that. Now I say there's music I understand and music I don't understand. So just like a stem cell, just do it, anything. Yeah.
I'm John.
Hi, John.
Thank you very much for your enlightening talk on your career, musical career. You say you do not like to compare, but as an audience, you got no choice. I think this will be a comparison with the late Liberace, because both of you are very good in your hands. It's also well known, Liberace always say that his hands are insured. Do you insure your hands? If you do, can you disclose how much? Thank you.
Firstly, I have to ask you, are you an insurance agent? No, I wouldn't like to talk about the amount, but I have a general insurance that has a loading on my hands, but I didn't take up any specific insurance for my hands. I suppose I should have, but because when I was 40 years old, I had some very bad injury in my wrist. I couldn't play for 6 months. I was very depressed. And then I went for everything, physiotherapy, ultrasound, acupuncture with microelectric shock. I mean, just every single thing I tried, only person I didn't go and see is a witch doctor. But in the end, I had surgery and I recovered fully. Dr. Kalwanjit Soin, probably our most famous hand doctor, fixed my hand for me. And I had elbow, I had tennis elbow, even though I never played tennis. I was from just too much of piano playing. I also had surgery, but I had other ailments that I managed to cure using either ultrasound treatment or physiotherapy. And now I'm having knee problems, and I think but I'm very vain, that's why I leave my walking stick over there. So I don't have photos of me walking on the walk. So the answer to your question is no real special insurance. And Liberace is wonderful, one of my heroes. Thank you for mentioning him.
All right. Nada, do you have anyone over there?
Jeremy, my name is Lim. Today's context, the people who want to study music go to the university, they go conservatory and all those things. In your case, you did not go there. What happened is you started very early. I mean, it seems from what I hear from you, you learn the music and then you start working. So in your case, it looks like it's a craft which you practice over time and you master it, and then you were lucky in the sense that you made a pretty good living out of it as well. I mean, being a musician, even today, it's not easy to make a living, particularly in Singapore. So what's the difference for those who go to university, go to conservatory and seek out masters in music to do their degree and come out and yet not successful? But in your case, you're just a practitioner and yet you achieve so much success.
Well, thank you for your question. I think that I wish that I had the opportunity to study music. In fact, my father had actually saved some money for me to study at Berklee College of Music, but the business went very bad at one point, and so we couldn't follow through. And at that time, I was a little bit resentful of him at that time. But now I don't feel at all, because I think that everything happens for a reason, and I think that I'm quite lucky that I had the path that I have had. And I think everyone has a different path, and for me, a lot of the musicians in my generation, we didn't study music formally. Of course, I studied classical music properly for 8 years, so I know all the rules of Western harmony. I have correct fingering when I play. and I learned all the good habits from the good teachers. And so I think that basic training was very fantastic for me. But the rest I learned as I went along. Or like, you remember I told you, can you write a 30 orchestra? You know, our people study in school to do that, but I didn't know anything about it. So of course I learned it from the street, from my uncle and other people. So I wish I had a chance to go to school, and at the same time, I think our youth of today are very lucky, because what took me 20 years to learn, they can learn in 4 years. Okay? So that is the plus point about music education. That, of course, if you have to firstly have the propensity. Some people call talent, but I don't really like this word. You have to have the propensity to become an artist or musician. And then number 2, you have to have the discipline and the will, right? And then number 3, if you have these 2 things, whether you learn from the street or you learn from the college, if you don't have these 2 things, then it won't happen.
Okay.
Good evening, Mr. Monteiro. Thanks a lot. Very pleasurable to be in this. There's just a couple of technical. Do you mind to just, for this evening, to share how do you work around your styles for contemporary, especially in your jazz pieces, your improvisation, and how do you ad-lib? Your timing, and it's wonderful. It's something very close to the European style. Your improvisation and the ad-lib. Don't mind, share some short things.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Sure. Well, firstly, music is a language, and the language of jazz is actually a dialect, okay? And it is still predicated on the rules of Western classical harmony. Nobody has invented any new, although now they have started to bring back microtonal music. I don't know if you know, our brains, as a result of exposure to Western classical music, has lost the ability to think microtonally. Nowadays, microtonal means out of tune, but actually no, from our tradition, this part of the world, microtones are part of was part of our DNA. And in order to, because it's a language, in order to speak, people ask me what's the difference between classical music and jazz music. I'll describe to you. A classical musician is someone who's able to either read the music very well or memorize it. Same as a person who gives a speech, who memorizes or reads a speech from a teleprompter. Of course, the speech only becomes good if the person is able to emote and express himself, right? Well, a jazz musician is someone who's like a speaker who has a cue card, and on the cue card there's 3 or 4 points, and then the next. And when you look at the first point, you can extemporize. But what you need to be able to do that, you have to have a wealth of knowledge in your head. You would have had to have listened to a lot of music, practice a lot, or if you're a speaker, you have to have read and read and read, and your mind becomes a repository of information that you are able to recall. Now, both disciplines are fantastic. I mean, a classical musician, to be able to remember all those wonderful notes written by Beethoven or Mozart and so on and so forth, and to repeat it. And I think that when we improvise, for example, just a quick description technically, when I see a D minor chord, my brain tells me that I can play the Dorian mode, okay? And then when I hit a C7 chord, the brain tells me I can play a Mixolydian mode. These are all terms of scale. So now I do it intuitively. I don't have to think anymore. But when I was starting, I had to think. The good thing about it is that in jazz now, I'm so pleased, right, that the Minister of Education announced earlier this year that that you can study jazz as an elective for O-level. This has really warmed my heart at the age of almost 60 to wish for this and push for this for my whole life, and to see it happen this year. And I think they will announce even more initiatives like this. But as far as playing is concerned, I think practice is one. 2 is listening. Because for a jazz musician, you learn by listening. If I practice too, I always tell my students, or when I used to teach regularly, or when I do my workshops at the universities, when you practice 2 hours, you should be listening 2 hours, and not just cursory listening, but deep listening. And because you learn a lot by osmosis, sort of osmosis, where the information goes into your mind, and then later on when you connect what you hear in your head with what your hands are able to do, then slowly you'll be able to develop more. I want to just say that there are 4 things in the growth of a musician. One is, as a jazz musician, one is to learn the instrument and master it as much as you can. 2 is to build your repertoire. Because before the age of 40, if you learn songs by heart, you can retain your whole life. Like just now when I was telling you, I can rattle off names from my youth, right, my childhood. But yesterday, I can't remember what I had for lunch, right? So just learn as many songs as you can. 3rd is to develop beautiful phrasing. Phrasing is the point where craftsmanship becomes art for music. The point where craftsmanship becomes art is phrasing. How do you phrase your piece? Why can one person play Bridge Over Troubled Water? All the notes are correct, but it doesn't move you. Why another person can play the intro for Bridge Over Troubled Water, tears come down from your eye already. Same notes. And its phrasing is the secret. And the last thing is to develop your own voice, such that when people hear a few notes, they know already that it's you playing or you singing.
Hi, Professor Jeremy. Thank you very much for taking time tonight to share with us all your interesting anecdotes and as well as thoughts on some of your life approaches. So one of the points that really resonated with me was the point about, you mentioning we have to be in silence in order to have creativity. What do you actually do?
So I do have a little bit of meditation practice where I meditate on my breath, not really any kind of religious discipline, but just to observe my breath, breathing in and out. And after you do it for a while, the mind quietens. And that's one thing that I do whenever I can. The other thing is actually practicing also quietens my mind. So if I used to play the trumpet a lot. So when I started practicing trumpet recently, again, and just playing the long tones of the trumpet also allows me to still my mind, so I think practicing is another way that I'm centered as well. And these are the 2 simple things that I do to to quieten my mind. Yeah.
Okay, good evening, Jeremy. My name is Joe. Okay, just my question is, if one were to contract, you call it this rheumatoid arthritis of the fingers, I repeat, rheumatoid arthritis of the fingers, will this somehow in one way or another interfere with playing of the organ? And insofar as playing of the organ is concerned, is it preferable to have long and slender fingers? And what about those people with short and stubby, thick fingers like me? And last but not least, because just wondering, during your time at SCF Music Drama Company, do you happen to encounter Jack Neo or Marcus Chin is way before?
Marcus Chin is my time actually.
Jack Neo during your time?
No, Marcus Chin also.
During your time? Oh, okay.
Chen Ping, his Chinese name.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I think that, of course, playing music is a physical activity, and I'm actually very, very athletic, but only in my fingers, as you can see. so it is a problem because I used to have gout actually, and thankfully I'm one of the rare people that the doctor told me that your gout has actually left you. Very small percentage of people experience. But when I had gout, I used to suffer quite a lot actually, and now I don't have it. But I know that we are human beings, so this is a physical activity, and some people will encounter such activity. I think I have stiffness now. I mean, being a little older, I have all these issues, but I try and find workarounds. Maybe I don't do this anymore, and then I find some other creative way to express myself, because now I cannot do this because it's not physically comfortable for me to do anymore. But there are many ways. When I was having this injury and couldn't play for 6 months, I was starting, maybe I need to compose more. Maybe I need to do more orchestral arrangements. Maybe I would never be able to play again. Can you imagine going through this for 6 months of my life? But if you want to make music, then you just find a way to make music. When you want to do something, you look at some of the people who are disabled, right, and can take part in certain sports that you just cannot believe. If you want to do it, I think we force ourselves and find a way to do it. I hope that answers your question.